Happy Wednesday. This is episode number 11, and today I want to talk to you about as a child the fear that I had for immigration officers, not only the immigration officers in the United States, but also in Mexico. So, as you guys know, my grandparents raised me and my sisters. So, growing up, whenever they would go visit their family, for the most part, I was the one going with them. They had a house in Nuevo Laredo, which is the Mexico side, and Laredo, Texas, right? So Laredo, Texas, is the USA side, and then Nuevo Laredo is Mexico side. So that's where they had their house. So we would go, and my grandpa would go check up on the house, and I was always the one going with them. So maybe I was from 8 to 10 years old. We were down there visiting my grandmother's family, which I absolutely love being there with them. I remember the conversations the grown-ups would have, and I would wake up to them having those conversations. So I would wake up and I could hear everybody in the kitchen table sitting around drinking coffee, and someone was already making breakfast or buying pan dulce. And I remember I would get up and I would go to the table, and my tias and tios would be like, "Do you want some coffee? Do you want some breakfast?" And I would just sit there and listen to them speak. And I love that. They would talk about, the times when they were young. So that was really, really cool to listen. You know what? Now that I think about it, I think that that's why I'm so curious and I always want to learn. And I have a passion for history because of everything that they would speak. Because while they were talking about their memories, I would imagine how life was back then, and it was like a different world. So that one time we got ready to come back to Dallas, and I remember my grandfather, my abuelo, was already a legal resident, but my abuelita still had a visa to come back and forth. So we were inside the bus and we were about to cross into the US, and immigration came up and they were checking everyone's documents. When they came to my abuelita, they saw her, I guess, visa card, and they asked us to step out of the bus. So imagine the confusion for me at that age. I was like, "What's going on?" So we get out and they're looking at her card, and he's like, "No, I can't accept this." And he gets some scissors and cuts the card. So as soon as she begins to cry, I begin to cry because I'm like, okay, something's not right. So I begin to cry, and I'm grabbing onto her, and my abuelo and her were talking, and they were like, "Okay, well, we'll go, you'll stay, and then figure that out with the visa, and then we'll see you back in Dallas." So my abuelo and I got back in the bus, and I was crying. I was like hysterical. I was looking out the window and I could see her still there, and I was like, I didn't understand what was happening. So my abuelo was telling me, "It's gonna be okay, we're gonna go home, and then next week she'll come to Dallas." So then we get on the bus, and the bus takes off, and passing San Antonio, we stopped to get out to the restroom, and my abuelo asked me if I was hungry, and I said yes. And I remember he bought me tacos, and they were barbacoa tacos, where they were so greasy, and I ate them anyway. But by the time I got to Dallas, I was so sick. I was really, really sick, and I was crying. As soon as I saw my mom, I was like, they didn't let my abuelita come, and I was really sad. So my mom reassured me, and she said everything's gonna be fine. She's gonna fix that, and she'll be here next week. So yeah, like it took like a week, and then she was back in Dallas, and then I felt so much better. But that was like my introduction to feeling stress, fear, and the gentleman wasn't friendly at all. And I think that's one of the main factors on why everything was being so harsh on me, right? So not so long after that, my abuelita had an appointment in Juarez to get her resident card. And I remember that time again, my abuelo, my abuelita, and I took off to El Paso, Texas. She had family in El Paso, Texas, both in El Paso and Juarez. So it was going to be super convenient because someone was going to be able to, we were going to stay in El Paso, but then we would be able to go into Juarez and go to her appointments. And the time there was really cool. It just so happened that there was a cousin there that was around my age, so I did have time to play with him. He was a baseball player, so I did go to some of his games, and we would play outside. And I was so confused because I was like, he doesn't speak Spanish, but he's in El Paso, and in my head, El Paso was kind of like same thing as Mexico. So that was funny to me to have that cultural shock. Then I remember that the appointment came up the following day in Juarez. So my abuelita, my abuelo, and I, along with some other family members, we were in Juarez, and they were like, okay, well, the appointment is a little later, so how about we go have breakfast, and then after that we can go to the appointment. So we go out to eat to a really nice Mexican restaurant for breakfast, and I noticed that there's like a indigenous lady sitting down selling some gum, and she has a baby, and I don't even think she spoke Spanish. And I remember that a gentleman from inside came, super upset, screaming at her, like telling her to get out of here, and kind of pushing her away. And I was like, that is not, like, I was so scared, but at the same time I had all that anger because at that young age I knew that was not right. So then after that, we headed to the appointment, and when we were at the appointment, we were like in this waiting area, and there was a young guy walking by selling some cassettes, music. And my grandma was like, do you want to buy something? And I'm like, yeah, of course. So I was looking through his list, and I came across a tape that I wanted, and I got it. And I don't even know what happened to that tape, but she bought me that tape, and then we heard her name. So the three of us get up, and we're walking towards the counter. That counter was pretty high because I was on my tippy toes to look on the other side. And when I saw that man's face, that man was not friendly at all. He didn't look like welcoming, and he looked like he was over everything. And I remember my abuelo and my abuelita gave him the papers, and he was like, no, this is not gonna work for me. And my grandma and grandpa were like, well, what do you need? Do we need to bring anything else? No, this is not gonna work, so can you please go, because there's more people in line. And when I saw my grandma cry, I began to cry, and I was like, not again. Like, once again they're gonna take her, like, they're not gonna let her go with me. So my abuelo calmed us down, and he told us, let's go back to El Paso. We can talk about it over there. So we headed back to El Paso, and that night they had a meeting. Like, it was all the grown-ups were having a meeting, and they had my mom on the phone with the attorney back here in Dallas. And the attorney was like, Enriqueta, you need to go. You need to go and be there with your parents, because your parents are already seniors. They're not going to respect them. And imagine this 9-year-old just listening to everything that's being said. So I was like, okay, my mom's coming tomorrow, so I'm good. Everything's gonna be good. She's gonna fix everything. The following day, my mom arrives, and she calls. She's like, I'm already here. So the lady that was gonna go pick up my mom invited me to go with her so I could recognize my mom, because she didn't know who my mom was. So when we got in the car, we drove to the airport, and when we got to the sidewalk by the airport, I saw my mom, and I got out of the car, and I ran towards her, and I hugged her, and I started crying. I was like, you're my last hope. You're the one that's gonna make this okay. So then we went back with my grandma and grandpa, and they were explaining to her everything. They were letting her know everything about what had happened the day before. So we waited. The following day we went back to Juarez, and we were in Juarez, and I remember, I promise you guys, it was like my mom was a badass. She wasn't even there for more than 5 minutes. Like, if it's 2 minutes, it's too much. She literally went up to the counter, presented the documents, and the guy was like, "Okay, yeah, she's approved." That was that. And of course, I think my mom at that time was like, "Hold on, they were here yesterday and they were treated so bad, and now you're saying that everything's good?" It's like, yeah. And then I was like, she was like, "Well, that's not right. That's not right for people to be treated like that." So we got our, she got her, her documents, her stamp, and then we went back to El Paso. And I was so happy because at that moment my mom became my hero. Like, she made it happen. She went in there, she spoke, she now being back in Dallas and my grandmother having her resident card, it was easier for us to go back and forth to Nuevo Laredo. So imagine this, my mom would get all of us in the car, and then we would take off. So sorry, I had to come inside because the neighbor was cutting the grass. Um, like I was mentioning, I feel that, and I respect everyone's job. I feel that immigration, it's a very important, it's a very important duty, and it's very important for each country to have it, right? What I don't agree with is sometimes people with authority forget that we're all the same, we're all human, and we're no better than the other, and we need to treat each other with respect. It in the example that I'm using is, I was young. I was between 8 and 10 years old, and I was witnessing all that. Maybe I wasn't supposed to be there, but I'm glad that I was able to be there because it allowed me to see that and to know that that's not how I wanted to be when I grew up. And now that I am an adult, I feel like I treat everyone with respect, and I'm very empathetic with anyone, and I don't like any type of disrespect to anyone. And whenever I think about it, sometimes we get lost in our privilege, and our privilege blinds us and doesn't allow us to be empathetic with people. We feel that since we will never be in those situations, that it that we should look the other way, and it's not about that. It's not even like that. It's about having that respect for another human. You, especially anyone in those types of positions, you need to be mindful of the people that you're talking to. Like, all this was happening in front of a child, and I carried that for so many years, and I'm so glad that, like I mentioned, that I was able to go through all that, because the moment that I saw my mother go in there and speaking up and making that happen, she was my hero at that moment. She was able to bring my abuelita back home to us, and then after that, everything was good. I remember we would take weekend trips to Nuevo Laredo, and imagine her. She was young, and she would put all her children in the vehicle, and her mom, my abuelita, and we would drive down to I'm sorry, not Juarez. We would drive down to Nuevo Laredo, and we would cross. And at first, it was a little bit scary because whenever you cross into Mexico, you either get a green light or a red light. And if you got a red light, it meant that they were going to search you. So imagine my mom and my grandma, and then all of us in the car, and then we would get a red light. My grandma and my abuelita and me and my mom would be arguing with them. And at first we would be so scared. We would be like, "No, like, mom, stop." And then my abuelita was like, she would be like, "What do you think we have? It's just us two women with our kids. Like, it's just our clothes. We're only going to be here for a few days." Um, and then the gentleman would kind of like laugh and kind of like get embarrassed, and then they would kind of let us go. But my mom would be like, don't you ever feel uh, don't you ever be scared of in these situations, because you are not doing anything wrong. You're not doing anything wrong, therefore you shouldn't feel scared. You learn how to use your words and learn how to defend yourself, because we didn't do anything wrong. We don't have anything in this vehicle. The only thing that we have is it's our clothes, and that's it. And then coming back, of course, it was easy. Like it wasn't a huge production like whenever I would go with alone with my abuelita and my abuelo on the bus. I think that because we would drive, and my mom was an American citizen, everything was a little bit easier for us when we would come back. So as I started growing up, like that fear kind of faded away. But I do remember those years when I was young, and I would feel that. And now that I'm an adult, I would love to be involved with an organization that kind of helps individuals going through that transition, where they become legal residents, or they get legal status, and just kind of like to talk to them, to hear them out, to hear their stories, and to let them know that they are not alone, and that even I experienced some sort of situations with the whole immigration process. And it was really eye-opening, and I can tell you that my experience is way different from what my sister's experience. I don't think they ever had that fear, or they've never been exposed to that. It was just me, and I think it goes back with me always wanting to be in the mix of everything. Me always wanting to be with my grandparents. Maybe if I would have been like, no, I'm gonna stay home with my mom and dad, I wouldn't have been exposed to all these different situations. But the fact that I'm so curious, and I want to learn, and I want to be involved in everything, maybe that's why I, without knowing, expose myself to all these different scenarios that have shaped me into who I am right now. If you really think about it, if I would have stayed away from all that, and I would just kept on with no type of worry, just done, like stayed away from those situations, I don't think I would have learned all those great lessons that life teaches you. I think that maybe I wouldn't be as empathetic with other people's struggles, with what other people go through, because I can easily say, well, it's not happening to me, like I'm good, like. But I'm so glad that it didn't turn out that way. I'm so glad that I was exposed to all this, and I was able to see everything, because it has made me into the man I am today. So I want to thank you so much. This is episode number 11. This was two little incidents that happened with my abuelita, and I know that in those moments I was so scared, and it didn't make sense. It still doesn't make sense that I was always in these situations, but I'm grateful because I learned a lot from those experiences. And the most important thing was that I was able to have my abuelita and my abuelo here in Dallas with me, and with no worries. Like, I can't imagine them being, with me and having that fear that maybe they didn't have a legal status and they could have easily been taken back. Luckily, that wasn't the situation. Luckily, they had their residency, they worked, they were able to retire here, they lived a good life here. So I'm grateful for that. And thank you so much for listening, and I appreciate all the messages. And let me tell you that sometimes I feel kind of like, should I stop? Or I kind of like doubt myself. But the moment that I feel that, there's always at least one person that comes up and kind of like talks to me about an episode that they watch. So thank you so much for that, because that keeps me going. And you may not know it, or you may not think that it makes a difference, but it makes a huge difference, because there is moments where I'm kind of like, and that's something personal. I feel like we all have that imposter syndrome, or we feel sometimes we are not worthy, or we're not important, and we all feel that. But thank you so much whenever you do reach out to me. I really appreciate that. So I hope you have a phenomenal Wednesday, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.